Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating and honestly, an increasingly complex web that every modern educator and school counselor finds themselves caught in. We are talking about that tricky intersection of technology, ethical boundaries, and some incredibly strict privacy laws. It's a digital dilemma that touches literally everything, from your personal social media profiles and virtual emergency interventions, all the way to the highly sensitive data stored in student records. Okay, let's dive into this. To help us get through all these dense concepts, here is our mental roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the virtual counseling revolution, followed by the blurring of boundary lines. Then we'll cover virtual crises and safety, navigating FERPA, handling case notes and records, and finally, the PPRA protections. Section 1, the virtual counseling revolution, the massive shift to online student support. So think back to when the COVID-19 pandemic first hit. Suddenly, 50.8 million students, along with their counselors, were thrust into this unprecedented virtual reality. And look at how drastically that shockwave changed our collective perspective. Back in 2013, a lot of counselors felt online communication just kind of wasn't compatible with their highly personal, face-to-face roles. But today, we're seeing a massive reversal. Over 3/4 of counselors, that's combining the 10.8% who strongly agree and the 66.5% who agree, now view tools like video conferencing not as awkward temporary backups, but as absolutely essential instruments for reaching students and families. It's a whole new world. Section 2, blurring the boundary lines, social media, free speech, and professional distance. Because of this new digital landscape, professional lines are no longer neatly separated by the physical brick-and-mortar walls of a school building. We really have to rethink what professional distance actually looks like in cyberspace. So imagine this scenario for a second. You're at home, completely off the clock, and you decide to post a highly controversial political opinion on Facebook. Or maybe you make a TikTok video where you're joking around with your students in a very familiar peer-like way. The big question is, can you actually be fired for a personal social media post? Take a guess on what the legal outcome would be. Well, the answer is inextricably tied to something psychologists call the disinhibition effect. This quote perfectly captures it. You see, the anonymity and physical distance of the internet kind of create this false sense of invisibility. It causes people, and yes, that includes highly trained educators, to just drop their guard. They might share a bit too much, use inappropriate language, or treat students like buddies. The standard appearance of authority is totally minimized online, and honestly, that's exactly where the danger lies. So, back to our question. Yes, you absolutely can face discipline or termination. A lot of folks assume the First Amendment offers a blank check for anything you say online, but legal precedents tell a very different story. While the 1968 Pickering case did give educators free speech rights, the 2006 Garcetti case came along and clarified that speech harming your employer or hindering your job performance, that's not protected. Educators are held to a very high standard of care. A really famous example of this is Spannerman v. Hughes. Now, this was back in 2008, so the teacher was actually fired over peer-like conversations on MySpace of all things. But the legal precedent absolutely stands today. Professional distance applies online just as strictly as it does right there in the classroom. Section 3, virtual crises and safety, navigating high-stakes emergencies online. If managing professional boundaries online is tough, navigating high-stakes emergencies virtually is incredibly daunting. When a student is in a real crisis and you are separated by miles of physical distance, standard interventions suddenly become so much more complicated. Consider this harrowing real-world case study. You're on a call with an online student, let's call him Seth. He's expressing active suicidal ideation and describes exactly how he plans to end his life. You try to reach his father on another line, but Seth tells you his dad left his cell phone at home. You can even hear it ringing in the background. Then Seth says he has to go and abruptly tries to end the conversation. What is your immediate next move? In these life or death scenarios, the standard of care is crystal clear, and safety always supersedes confidentiality. Step 1, you must do everything in your power to keep that student engaged on the call or the device. Step 2, attempt to contact their parents or guardians immediately. But in Seth's case, where the parent is totally unreachable, you move immediately to step 3. You call the local police in the student's area to conduct a welfare check. You tell the dispatcher you suspect the student is suicidal and the parents can't be reached. You never, ever prioritize keeping a secret over keeping a student alive. Section 4, navigating FERPA and privacy. Demystifying the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act.
Transitioning from physical safety to data safety, we hit an acronym you hear constantly in education, but you might actually misunderstand it. It's FERPA. Now, what's really interesting about this law is its core purpose. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974 is a federal statute designed to give parents the right to view their children's education records, the right to seek to amend inaccurate information, and the power to control, within certain parameters, who else gets to see that information. Basically, without written consent, personally identifiable information generally cannot be disclosed.
However, there is a massive and absolutely vital exception here. As the U.S. Department of Education highlights, FERPA is not intended to be an obstacle to school safety. If a student threatens violence against themselves or another student, educators are legally empowered to disclose that information to appropriate authorities, like the police, health officials, or school administration, without needing parental consent. In an emergency, safety trumps privacy every single time. So, the crucial point here is understanding exactly what kind of data we're dealing with. FERPA distinguishes between two distinct buckets of data. The first bucket is directory information. Think names, addresses, photos, honors, and maybe sports team rosters. Schools can generally publish this stuff unless a parent specifically opts out. However, on the flip side, we have personally identifiable information, or PII. This includes things like social security numbers, specific dates of birth, or sensitive medical details. This data is strictly protected and absolutely requires written consent before you can share it.
Section 5. Case Notes and Records. Understanding what you must share.
Now, understanding what you must share is a massive legal dilemma, especially when you're dealing with families in conflict. Let's look at another scenario. Picture an angry parent storming into your office. They are involved in a really bitter custody dispute, and they demand copies of all your personal counseling notes regarding their child. Are you legally required to hand over the notes you took during a private session? Like, are your private files actually private? Well, the answer depends entirely on how you categorized and stored those notes. FERPA makes a really critical distinction here. If your notes are what's called sole possession records, meaning they are merely personal memory aids kept completely private by you and never shared with another human being, they are exempt from FERPA. You don't have to turn them over. But the second you share those notes with a teacher, or as is way more common today, log them into the school's digital database, they instantly become official education records. At that point, they are fully subject to FERPA, and yes, you must provide them to the parents upon request. There are also some really fascinating edge cases regarding who actually gets access to these records. For instance, in a custody battle, school officials cannot play favorites. Non-custodial parents have full FERPA rights to see those records unless a specific court order intervenes. Step-parents, on the other hand, usually don't have those rights unless they're acting as the primary day-to-day caregiver. And what about inside the classroom? Thanks to a Supreme Court ruling, peer grading is totally fine because a grade isn't an official record until it hits the teacher's actual gradebook. And as for your own notes, you are absolutely allowed to amend or purge them anytime, unless there's an active subpoena, of course.
Section 6. The PPRA Protection. Guarding Family Privacy in Surveys.
So, while FERPA protects existing records, another piece of federal legislation protects students from invasive data collection in the first place. It's called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, or PPRA. Basically, it's a federal law requiring written parental consent before schools can mandate minor students to participate in surveys, analyses, or evaluations that reveal highly sensitive personal or family information. And let me tell you, it is incredibly easy for well-meaning educators to accidentally violate this law when they're sending out things like school-wide needs assessments or routine mental health check-in surveys. Specifically, PPRA protects 8 strict categories. You cannot mandate surveys probing into a family's political affiliations or their religious practices. You can't ask about their income levels or demand critical appraisals of close family members. Furthermore, deeply personal topics like mental health struggles, sexual behaviors, illegal or antisocial actions, or legally privileged relationships with lawyers or ministers are completely off-limits without explicit written parental permission. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, from the shifting boundaries of our virtual world and the psychological traps of the disinhibition effect, all the way to the strict federal guardrails of FERPA and PPRA. So I want to leave you with a final thought to really reflect upon. Knowing how easily the digital world blurs our professional lines and knowing the immense reach of these federal privacy laws, how will you adjust your own digital footprint to protect yourself and your students moving forward? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep exploring these crucial boundaries, and I will catch you in the next one.